Chapter 2. Jeshua, who wrote Deutero-ISAIAH. The unknown prophet who led the Hebrews out of the captivity at Babylon and into their homeland, as Joshua before him. Jeshua and Deutero-ISAIAH. For each of us, after death, there is a period in other spheres of activity. Edgar Cayce suggests that each time we are in a deep sleep, we leave the body and journey to other dimensions of consciousness. This is well illustrated in the autobiography of Carl Jung, as he relates his experiences in other spheres during the time of sleep. He had suffered a severe illness. He was hospitalized. He had been going through a time of great irritability, yet neither his physical condition nor his mental distress during those weeks had any bearing on the journey into other dimensions. It would seem that he was also able to move, at will, through time. Once he saw himself as a yogi, deep in meditation, and the face was his own. On the night that his mother died, he saw her moving, with great intensity, toward the higher realms. In re-entering the body, there are moments in time. In lifetimes. When we choose to carry on a work which has been a part of us in the most recent experience in the earth. Again, we may go almost to the opposite extreme in our expression for another lifetime, but the soul has memory of all that it has ever been. Sometime, somewhere, we seem to continue a pattern which began centuries before. Jeshua, according to Edgar Cayce, rewrote the books of the Old Testament. That which was begun by Melchizedek was completed by Jeshua, a Persian scribe, in a much later period. Perhaps, Isaiah or the latter portion of it has a greater spiritual impact upon the reader than any other book in the Old Testament. It is believed by biblical scholars that several writers may have contributed to the early chapters of Isaiah. Tradition tells a story of 3 Isaiahs, one of whom suffered martyrdom by being sawn in two. In actuality, the book of Isaiah is an anthology of poems. For each verse is, within itself, a poem. Chapters 40 to 66 are attributed to an unknown poet. A poet-prophet, whose writings are known as the Song of the Servant. Chapters 56 to 66 are believed to have been written much later than the first part of Isaiah. From my study of the Akashic records, it would seem that the latter portions were written by Jeshua, and in these songs of suffering, Jeshua wrote of his own suffering in the earth, as Melchizedek first compassed the book of Job. We might ask why a Persian scribe rewrote the books of the Bible. Apparently, as with Hermes, the Nubian, who migrated with Ra-Ta into Egypt, Jeshua was also a stranger, who found himself once again with his own people, the Hebrews. Although he was not born into their tradition. Or again, perhaps the mother of Jeshua was, herself, Hebrew. Thus his name. For whatever reason, the spiritual imprint of Jeshua is in the books of Deutero-ISAIAH. That one who is called by scholars the second Isaiah. Here, Isaiah would be a title given to all those who contributed to this great anthology of poetry and, except for the first Isaiah, whose writings are found in the early chapters, Isaiah would not have been the name of the poet-prophet, whose contributions to this anthology are the most moving of any verses in the Old Testament. Edgar Cayce does not state definitely that Deutero-ISAIAH was written by Jeshua, or that Deutero-ISAIAH, the writer, was Jeshua. He does give. Study the book which tells of him, Jesus, born of the Virgin Mary. Know this is the sole entity, Jeshua, who reasoned with those who returned from captivity in those days when Nehemiah, Ezra, Zerubbabel were factors in the attempts to re-establish the worship of God. And that Jeshua, the scribe, translated the rest of the books written up to that time. According to John B. Noss, professor of philosophy at Franklin and Marshall College, in his book, Man's Religions, the central problem with which Deutero-ISAIAH was concerned loomed large in the minds of the exiled Jews. It was the problem of the evil that had befallen them. Why had Yahweh brought so much suffering upon them? The old answer that it was because of their sins was not wholly satisfactory. Deutero-ISAIAH set his people's trials against a world background. They were, he declared, a part of Yahweh's plan of world redemption. The conception here is magnificent in scope. Yahweh becomes without any qualification the only God. There is no other. His sphere of action is the whole world. Whatever he does must be seen against a cosmic background. Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is God everlasting, the creator of the ends of the earth. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. According to the writings of Deutero-ISAIAH, God speaks not only to his chosen people, but to all mankind in the earth, even to those who are to come long after him. Listen, you coastlands, to me. Hearken, you peoples from afar. The Lord called me from birth, from my mother's womb he gave me my name. He said to me, you are my servant, Israel, through whom I will show forth my glory. I, the Eternal, have called you of set purpose, and have taken you by the hand. I have formed you for the rescuing of my people, for a light to the nations. In the Edgar Cayce readings, it is indicated that although the Israelites are the chosen people in the sense that more than any other, the Jews brought forth the idea of the one God. Israelite means the seeker or the searcher, and in this sense the term refers to all people who seek out the Supreme Being. Many passages of Deutero-ISAIAH have a prophetic quality. It is almost as if he is foretelling of the Christ to come. He was despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their face, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he hath borne our griefs, and carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way. And the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. Was Jeshua not prophesying the Christ which he was to become as Jesus? But was he not, also, writing of his own sorrows in the earth? This stranger within the land, this citizen of the universe? The reason for the great response within us to the writings of Deutero-ISAIAH is that even more, perhaps, than the book of Job, there is the universal story of mankind in the earth. He was concerned with the Jews, and with the indignities and exile that they were suffering at that moment. He was also concerned with his personal crucifixions. We know, from his writings, that in that incarnation his way was not easy, and his burden was not light. To quote again from the depth study of Deutero-ISAIAH by John Noss in Man's Religions, Macmillan. Deutero-ISAIAH justified the ways of God to the Jews. But he not only looked into the past, he saw into the future. The next phase of God's redemptive plan, he declared, was a glorious restoration of the Jews to Jerusalem, where the work of redemption could proceed into all the world as from a center, amid the joy of all believers. This was to be effected through Cyrus, the Persian warlord, who by God's direction, would tread down rulers as a potter tramples clay, overthrow Babylon, and release the Jews. We might ask here if Jeshua, also Persian, might have interceded with Cyrus. Did Jeshua act as the intercessor for the Jews, since he was so greatly concerned with their plight? In his incarnation as Joseph, the son of Jacob and Rachel, had he not become the young prince of Egypt after his brothers sold him into slavery? Had he not then been a stranger in the land yet one second only to the Pharaoh? Was he not repeating the pattern of Joseph, as Jeshua, when once again he must have been an intercessor? It would seem that somehow Cyrus, the Persian, was persuaded to liberate the Jews who were captives in Babylon. Noss continues by saying, in the year 538 BC, Cyrus the Great took Babylon and made it the capital of a new empire, which was ultimately to stretch from the Persian Gulf to the Black Sea, and from the Indus River to the Greek cities on the Aegean Sea. When he looked about him, he found grouped together in the heart of Babylonia an unassimilated captive people, with ways different from the ways of other peoples. And on inquiring about them, he heard their plaints. In order to win their friendship and at the same time to have them go off to the border near Egypt and set up a buffer state, he gave them permission to return to Jerusalem. The return, so longed for by the first generation of exiles, was now possible. According to Jewish historians, Cyrus, the Persian, even restored to the Jews the vessels of the temple, which had been taken away by Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC. Would not Jeshua, who had formerly been Joshua, who, with Moses, liberated the Jews from Egypt, would not Jeshua have considered these sacred vessels which had been handed down from generations, even from the time of Joshua and Moses, of the greatest of importance? If he interceded with Cyrus the Great, and my own findings indicate this to be true, would he not have stressed the holy vessels which belonged to our forefathers from the time of the Ark of the Covenant? The Jews needed money to return to Jerusalem. Who was to give it to them? For some unknown reason, Cyrus, the Persian, furnished the funds for the Jews to make the expedition to the borders of Egypt, under the leadership of King Jehoiachin and Zerubbabel. Who persuaded Cyrus to do this? Can we not assume that once again, Jeshua, the Persian, made intercession for the people he had chosen to call his own? A century later, according to John Noss, this expedition was described by Ezra, the biblical writer, as an expedition of those whose spirit God had aroused to go up to build the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem. Because the consciousness of Joshua was a part of the consciousness of Jeshua, once again he was repeating a pattern. As Joshua, with Moses, he had led the Jews out of the land of Egypt. As Jeshua, with the assistance of the Persian king, Cyrus, he was to lead the Jews out of their captivity in Babylon. And through Jeshua, and this strange and peculiar people, a light was to reach all of mankind for centuries to follow. We know that Jeshua must have continued the writings of Deutero-ISAIAH on this expedition toward the homeland of the Jews. Edgar Cayce indicated that Joshua, despite his many activities, was a very lonely individual, as often the old soul may find himself to be. From the songs of sorrow of Deutero-ISAIAH, we know that Jeshua, too, was lonely in spirit, and one not always understood by his fellow man. One of the most poignant of all his writings is found in the 54th chapter of Isaiah. Fear not, for thou shalt not be ashamed. Neither be thou confounded, for thou shalt not be put to shame. For thou shalt forget the shame of thy youth, and shall not remember the reproach of thy widowhood any longer. For thy Maker is thine husband. The Lord of hosts is his name. And thy Redeemer the Holy One of Israel. The God of the whole earth shall he be called. For the Lord hath called thee as a woman forsaken and grieved in spirit, and a wife of youth, when thou wast refused, saith thy God. For a small moment have I forsaken thee, but with great mercies will I gather thee. In a little wrath, I hid my face from thee for a moment, but with everlasting kindness will I have mercy on thee, saith the Lord, thy Redeemer. For this is as the waters of Noah unto me, for as I have sworn that the waters of Noah should no more go over the earth, so have I sworn that I would not be wroth with thee, nor rebuke thee. For the mountains shall depart, and the hills be removed. But my kindness shall not depart from thee. Neither shall the covenant of my peace be removed, saith the Lord that hath mercy on thee. O, thou afflicted, tossed with tempest, and not comforted. Behold, I will lay thy stones with fair colors, and lay thy foundations with sapphires. And all thy children shall be taught of the Lord, and great shall be the peace of thy children. In righteousness shalt thou be established. Thou shalt be far from oppression. For thou shalt not fear. And from terror, for it shall not come near thee. No weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against thee in judgment, thou shalt condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their righteousness is of me, saith the Lord. As Jesus was to say, centuries later, blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. This, too, is a promise made by Jeshua, that the days of sorrow shall be ended for those who love the Lord, and that in God's time, all things shall be given to them. Perhaps, more than any other book in the Bible, Isaiah, especially that portion written by Deutero-ISAIAH, was to relate to reincarnation and karma. The consciousness of past embodiments and of lifetimes yet to come seemed very strong in Jeshua. The memory of himself as Joseph, son of Rachel and Jacob, who was sold as a slave into Egypt by his brothers, is evident in Isaiah 60, when he writes, the sons also of them that afflicted thee shall come bending unto thee, and all they that despise thee shall bow themselves down at the soles of thy feet. In Genesis 42, the story of Joseph after he became a prince of Egypt, we read, "And Joseph was the governor over the land, and he it was that sold to all the people of the land, and Joseph's brethren came, and bowed down themselves before him with their faces to the earth." Within each of us is the memory of all that has happened throughout the ages. As Joseph was sold into Egypt by his brothers, so must he have sold others at some period in his sojourns in the earth. In each incarnation, also, there was much of the prophet in him. As Joseph the young son of Jacob, he had dreamed that the sun, the moon, and the stars fell down and worshipped him. Jacob, in interpreting the dream, immediately recognized the sense of pride within Joseph, which was to be a part of him in that lifetime, and Jacob reproved this proud young son. But after Joseph was sold into Egypt, after he found favor with the Pharaoh, after he became the prince or governor, his brothers, and finally his father, Jacob, did kneel before him, as in his dream so many years before. Both as Khans in Egypt, and as Hermes, the Nubian, who returned to Egypt with Ra, Jeshua would have been known as both a sun as well as a moon god. In the writings of Jeshua, we also read, "The sun shall no more be thy light by day, neither shall the brightness of the moon shine upon thee by night. But the Lord shall be unto thee an everlasting light, and thy God thy glory. The sun shall no more go down, neither shall thy moon withdraw itself. For the Lord shall be thine everlasting light, and the days of thy mourning shall be ended. As one whom his mother comforteth, so will I comfort you, and ye shall be comforted in Jerusalem. For since the beginning of the world men have not heard, nor perceived by the ear, neither hath the eye seen, O God, beside thee what he hath prepared for him that waiteth for him." The mission of Jeshua, who was also DEUTERO-ISAIAH, would seem to have been threefold. As a comforter of the people who were once again seeking their homeland, he became a comforter of all mankind. As a prophet, he knew no equal in his time. And, once again, assuming the role of Joshua, he must have acted as intercessor for the Jews with Cyrus, the Great. We know from the Douay version of DEUTERO-ISAIAH, it is also given in the King James Version, Jeshua has written a hymn to Cyrus, king of Persia, praising him as the conqueror of Babylon, liberator of the Jews, prophesying that he would permit the Jews to return to their native land to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. To Cyrus, anointed of the Lord, liberator of Israel. Thus says the Lord, your Redeemer, who formed you from the womb. I am the Lord who made all things, who alone stretched out the heavens. When I spread out the earth, who was with me? I turn wise men back and make their knowledge foolish. It is I, who confirm the words of my servants. I carry out the plan announced by my messengers. I say to Jerusalem, be inhabited. To the cities of Judah, be rebuilt. I will raise up their ruins. I carry out the plan announced by my messengers. Surely, here, Jeshua is speaking of himself as having announced a plan to Cyrus, the king, as to the liberation of the Jews. Once again he is assuming the role as advisor to the king, as did Joseph, before him, who advised the Egyptian pharaoh. He, himself, believes, apparently, that he is chosen of God to become a leader in this expedition toward Jerusalem, as he led the Jews out of Egypt into Canaan, as Joshua, centuries before. I, Jehovah, say of Cyrus, my shepherd who fulfills my every wish, he shall say of Jerusalem, let her be rebuilt. And of the temple, let its foundations be laid. Jeshua is using his pen to persuade Cyrus, the Persian, to liberate the Jews. He is conveying the message to Cyrus that the true God of Israel has a mission for Cyrus to perform. He goes on to prophesy a most brilliant future for Cyrus, if he chooses to aid the people who worship the true God. Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, Cyrus, whose right hand I grasp, subduing nations before him, and disarming kings, opening doors before him, and leaving the gates unbarred. I, Jehovah, will go before you, Cyrus, and level the mountains. Bronze doors I will shatter, and iron bars I will snap. I will give you treasures out of the darkness, and riches that have been hidden away, that you may know that I am the Lord, the God of Israel, who calls you by name. For the sake of Jacob, my servant of Israel, my chosen one, I have called you by your name, giving you a title, though you, Cyrus, the Persian, knew me not. I am the Lord and there is no other. There is no other God beside me. It is I who arm you, though you know me not, so that toward the rising and the setting of the sun, men may know that there is none besides me. Apparently, Cyrus had questioned Jeshua about his one God, and about the plans of the God of Israel for his people, for in the latter portion of this hymn, as if answering the arguments of Cyrus, Jeshua writes, "Woe to him who contends with his maker, a potsherd among potsherds of the earth. Dare the clay say to its modeler, what are you doing? Thus says the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, his maker. Do you question me about my children, or prescribe the work of my hands that stretched out the heavens? It was I who stirred up one, Cyrus, for the triumph of justice. All his ways I make level. He shall rebuild my city and let my exiles go free, without price or ransom, says the Lord of hosts." After this warning that Cyrus must not question the God of Israel, Jeshua again prophesies as to his future. Thus says the Lord, "The earnings of Egypt, the gain of Ethiopia, and the Sabaeans, tall of stature, shall come over to you and belong to you. They shall follow you, coming in chains." Strangely enough, much of this prophecy was fulfilled, for Cyrus, the king of Persia, was to conquer and create one of the greatest of all empires. From the Persian Gulf to the Black Sea, and from the Indus River to the Greek cities on the Aegean Sea. As a prophet, Jeshua had no equal, but there was not only this gift of foreseeing the future, but there must have been within him the sagacity of Joseph, the executive talents of Joshua, and the mysticism of Melchizedek. These, with a personality of such persuasiveness that Cyrus, the Persian, began to visualize himself as a conqueror, changed the course of the history of the Jews, as well as that of other lands. Of his personal life, we know but little. In some sense, there was great aloneness, as with Joshua. There would have been a mother who loved him greatly, since he compared the compassion of God to a mother's love. As one whom his mother comforteth, so will I comfort you. And above all, there was an absolute belief in the God of Israel. I believe that Jeshua believed, with all his spirit, that he, as Jeshua, was called by God to bring liberty to the captives, who were the Jews, to bind up the brokenhearted, to open the prison house in which they were bound, to comfort those that mourned, to give them the oil of joy for mourning. Because of some great sense of rejection within himself, he identified with all those who were lonely in spirit. Within Jeshua, there was some great and hidden sorrow which comes out in his writings. This could have been, from his own words, a rejection by a father image, but it was more likely that he had no earthly father. As a child, he felt that he was cast out, forsaken. A man does not take the mantle of the prophet, the robe of the mystic, the path of the initiate, who has not known great personal suffering. Since Jeshua was the same soul entity who was to become Jesus, in writing of himself as Jeshua, in writing of the mission of Jeshua, he is also foretelling the greater spiritual mission of the Christ who is to follow him. In seeking to comfort those of the house of Israel, as Jesus, he was to become the comforter for all people. If we take the Song of Sorrow alone and read it with the eyes of understanding, it tells a story of the personal suffering of Jeshua. His feelings of being an outcast in childhood, much of the reason for his later insight into the troubled hearts of all men. For I have called thee, Israel, as a woman, forsaken and grieved in spirit, and a wife of youth when thou wast refused. What is Jeshua saying here? Why does he use this particular analogy of a grieving woman who has been refused by her husband, to the sorrow of Israel? Is it not that he, who loved his mother greatly, suffered because she had no husband? Did his father forsake him and his mother? Did the father put them aside? Did the father refuse to accept any responsibility for this wife and child? This would seem to be the hidden sorrow of Jeshua. He was to write of it in many ways, and finally, he was to use the plight of his own mother as the plight of all Israel. What greater love could be shown a mother than this? Her son used the story of her loneliness and bereavement of spirit to tell the story of Israel. 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 Whom Jeshua, the Persian, loved as he loved no other. Israel, whose heartbreak was his own, and that of a lonely woman who nurtured and loved him in childhood. Israel, Israel, who was to nurture prophets and poets at her breast, and of whose people there would come that one, of whom Jeshua was to write. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord hath anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek. He hath sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to them that are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord, to comfort all that mourn, to appoint unto them that mourn in Zion, to give unto them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for heaviness, that they might be called trees of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he might be glorified. And thou shalt be called, sought out, a city not forsaken,